I'd like to welcome everyone today to the discussion on seed-related assistance in fragile contexts, particularly lessons for the COVID-19 response. So my name is Andrea Mottram and I'm the Programme Director for the SCALE Award with Mercy Corps. I'm supported by my SCALE colleagues today, Kristen Lambert, who's an Agricultural Advisor, Anusha Prasad, who's a Programme Officer, Wilfred Uko, who's the Agricultural Advisor for SCALE, as well as the Programme Lead for the Mercy Corps component of ISSD Africa Programme, and our Ideal Award colleague, Julia Randall from the comms team. Just before we move into the real meat of the session and I introduce the speakers, a little bit of housekeeping. So as I mentioned, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. I also encourage you throughout the session to share your experiences and resources and information in that chat box. This is very much about a shared learning session. So the more we can learn from you as well, the better. As we move through the discussion, I ask that you post your specific questions for the presenters in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that right at the bottom. This is just so that we can channel the questions specifically through that box to the panelists and for us all to discuss. Given the size of the group today, everyone is muted, but I will be looking through those chat boxes with the rest of the team to pull out some of your questions. And if you have any technical difficulties at all, please private message Julia Randall or Anusha Prasad by clicking the Everyone button in the chat box and then selecting their name and writing your message. So for those of you that don't know SCALE already, SCALE is a USAID Food for Peace funded initiative. It's implemented by Mercy Corps in collaboration with Save the Children. SCALE is a knowledge sharing, capacity strengthening and learning mechanism, and it's focused on agriculture, natural resource management and alternative livelihoods. And so the aim of SCALE is to improve the impact, sustainability and scalability of food for peace activities in agriculture and natural resource management, as well as alternative livelihoods. And this is in both emergency and development contexts. And so in this capacity, SCALE works with a broad range of food security implementers, other donors, networks, and collaborates with other technical wards, as well as communities of practice. And that all depends on the specific technical focus that we're working on at the time. And so, for example, within this seeds context, we are collaborating with ISSD Africa, because two of those components are led by Mercy Corps, as well as other collaboration mechanisms such as supporting seed systems for development activity, supporting emergency agriculture design standards, as well as Louise's seed system website and organization as well. So moving on to our discussion today, we all know, I think, by the fact that we're all here today, that access to quality seed is a critical component of successful agricultural production, and that supporting farmer seed security where it is needed and in the right way is really important. But how do we do that most effectively, and particularly with this added complexity of COVID-19 that we are all facing at the moment, which is obviously further complicating the precarious environments in which we work. So today, together with our panel of experts and with you all as participants as well, we're going to be discussing the likely impacts of the pandemic on farmers' access to quality seed, critical questions that we all, and especially humanitarian workers, must ask before intervening in seed systems, good practices for response, and the distinct but often novel hurdles posed in seed interventions and COVID-19 response. And so to help us navigate this discussion today and provide insights from a wealth of their combined experience, I have really great pleasure in introducing our panel for today. So I'm going to start with Louise Sperling, as she's the coordinator of seedsystem.org. She's technically managed and backstopped agricultural programs in over 30 countries across the globe for a number of years. I'd also like to welcome Jidone Barabutsa, who's the Associate Professor of Entomology at Purdue University. With over 20 years in international development, Jidone currently leads efforts to reduce post-harvest losses in grains and seeds, and again, in over 35 countries around the globe. We also have today Sean McGuire, who's an agricultural officer focused on seed security at FAO. Sean particularly works to support seed systems for smallholder farmers in high stress contexts and currently leads FEO's work on seed security. And finally, but by definitely no means least, Julie March is the Acting Division Director for the Preparation, Strategic Planning and Mitigation Division at the USAID Office for Foreign Disaster Assistance. And she's also the team leader for food security. And so Julie has promoted new approaches to seed system thinking in humanitarian work through technical support and operational research, currently focuses on sustainable agriculture and farming systems of smallholder farmers. So as you can tell, we have a great wealth of experience here, but we know that you all as participants are also working a lot in this field. And so we recognize that and invite you to share with us your experience and learning in the chat boxes as we go through today as well. So before moving on to our technical discussion, I would like to invite Charlie Davis, who's the Agricultural Officer at USAID Food for Peace. He's also the Agreement Officer for Scale, and I would like Charlie, you to open up the session for us.
Great, thanks for that, Andrea. And I just wanted to briefly, thank you and the Scale team, as well as all the presenters and participants. It's great to see such interest from the community in this topic. Clearly very important for Food for Peace partners and the broader kind of development and humanitarian community responding to COVID-19. I think just basically want to say that Food for Peace is very, very happy to be a part of this type of discussion, webinars of this nature, and also has upcoming webinars that would put a plug in for those participating in this one to join the Scale mailing list, going on to the FSN network, and becoming a part of that broader community, and being part of the discussion moving forward. So with that, I'll hand it over back to you, Andrea, I guess, or and then the presenters. So thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so now I'd like to invite Louise to start off the presentation and discussion for us. Louise is going to provide an overview of the key practical guidance for COVID-19 and seed security response, and then is then going to bring in the rest of the key experts to discuss a few specific areas. And then following those discussions, we'll have time for Q&A. So again, I ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll address a few after the presentations, particularly on any clarifying questions or reflections on what you've been hearing. And then we'll move into some specific questions that we'll take both from the chat box, the Q&A box, but also from some of the questions that you posed as you registered for the event. So Louise, I'd like to hand it over to you. Thanks.
So I've shared my screen. I hope everyone can see.
That's great. Thanks, Louise.
Okay, so this good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This presentation is about COVID-19 and seed security assistance. And it's, to be clear, it's meant to be a technical webinar, but sharing what we know so far. Our learning is going to accelerate very quickly. It's also focused to be clear, particularly on the seed security of smallholder farmers. So I can't advance the slides.
Clicking on the slide and then, yeah.
Good. Okay, so just so you know how it's organized, there will be a short overview presentation. Then there'll be focused discussion on storage and ICT during the time of COVID, seed quality and operational concerns, and then priorities. What are the priorities and trade-offs? Okay, a few kind of introductory comments. We're dealing here not just with COVID-19, but very likely COVID-19 overlain on other farming stresses. It could be drought, it could be locusts. All these constraints, and often multiple constraints, need to be addressed if indeed we do have a response. Also, seed assistance might be important, but it's not really a life-saving activity. Support to health centers, caring for the sick might have priority. And I think during this webinar, we really need to make some hard programming choices, discuss aid among multiple sectors. Second introductory comment is that if you do decide to do seed aid, recognize that it is serious business. Seed aid often has a nice, almost benign image, but in reality, seed aid can do real harm. If the seed is late or it's the wrong type of seed, in the short term, we're wasting farmers' labor and resources. So it's worse than doing nothing. Also, finally, as a reminder, in many countries, seed aid has been given again and again. So it's really been given long term. You see that Ethiopia has the record, 42 years. But Kivu, it's been ongoing since 1995. In Burundi, it's at least 38 seasons. So repetitive aid creates dependency, and it undermines commercial as well as local markets. And I think there's a risk with COVID-19, and that is that the virus is going to last many seasons. And I think we have to be careful that COVID-linked assistance doesn't become repetitive assistance. So our seed-related work needs to be evidence-based and truly effective. So this is kind of a warning that COVID is going to last season after season after season. It's kind of different from what we've addressed before. Okay, evidence. What background evidence do we already have that can inform what's happening during this period of COVID-19? So normally, where and how do smallholder farmers normally get their seed? Just to remind you, this data set, many of you already know, it's probably the largest in the world. It was first published in 2016. This is an update, so this is 2020 data, and it's on Seed System if some of you want to take a closer look. So where do farmers get seed? You see that there are multiple channels. If I move my cursor, can you see it like that? No, okay. There are multiple channels. About a third of the transactions, the mustard, are from own stock. Another third of the seed transactions come from the local market, the red. And then on the yellow, social networks are also quite important. Many of you are probably interested in the formal sector and agro-dealers. Know at this point that less than 3%, so it says 2.8, less than 3% of transactions come from agro-dealers. And it's interesting to us that this is the same 5 years ago. So there really has been no change. Some of you might work on community-based enterprises, and that's the pink. At this point, really, they have a fairly minimal effect on the overall seed supply. So less than 1%, you see 0.5% of transactions. So this is the state right now, pre-COVID, among smallholder farmers. So what do we think might happen with COVID? What is rumored? Let's be clear, it's not yet quantified, but these are the kinds of things we'll be looking at. What there's speculation about is that COVID will particularly affect the local markets, the red. It may affect social network exchange because of social distancing. And of course, many are talking about the green, the agro-dealer effects. So there are at least 3 channels that potentially could be affected by COVID-19. That said, we need to be much more precise. It's important that even if channels are disrupted, this disruption will differ by crop type. So here you see I've signaled maize. Maize is really the only crop in which agro-dealer sourcing has an important presence. So that's the green. If local markets are disrupted, Legumes will be particularly hit. You see the red? And then if social networks are disrupted, the yellow, it's the vegetatively propagated crops. It's the cassava and the potatoes which we particularly hit. So I think we should stop talking about general market disruption and seed channels and say, well, if exit channel is disrupted, this could be some of the effects on crops. So we have data to do this. And this is just a picture for those who aren't used to seeing seed markets. Okay, now, how is seed accessed? You know, before it was the where, and this is the how. You see there are at least 11 different ways in which seed can be accessed. 2 predominate. Own stock, look at all crops, the column all crops. You know, own stock, it's about 35% of transactions from own stock, but it's 36% transactions in which you're buying. So the norm for farmers is also to buy seed. The case with legumes is even more extreme. So you have about a third, 29%, right? Saved, but almost half of legume seed is bought, 50% of transactions. So routine is farmers to buy. So looking at these 2 general possible disruptions, market channel disruption and purchasing power needs. The first obvious action is to help farmers save seed. Instead of thinking right now about bringing in seed, probably step number 1 is to save. The seed with farmers have already is likely adapted, it's acceptable to farmers, and it's no cost. And I know for many of you this doesn't sound strategic, but saving seed might be key, certainly across Africa and many parts of the world. Okay, there are 3 actions linked to saving seed that need to be programmed. First, you need to do really good messaging. Save seed now, don't eat it or sell it. Do this by radio, do this by phone, do this by text message. Second, we might do some remote backstopping on selection. You know, make sure that farmers save the best seed they possibly can. And third, we might do a lot of remote backstopping on doing better storage. You should know that this action of saving seed was probably the most important intervention we did in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, and it was extremely effective. Okay, you know, moving forward, how do we figure out if there is a seed security problem? We're not going to intervene unless we do an assessment. At this point, likely we'll be doing remote assessments. New to some of us, but not to all of us. We can do this. There are some assessment guides that will help us with remote. There's a general guide on the left, which helps us with the logic. And then already, there are at least 2 set of specific question lists that I know of, at least, for remote assessment. There's one from Seed System, and there's one from the UN Food Security Cluster Group. So we're already moving very quickly to do assessments during COVID. The building blocks for remote assessment, you have to invest in multiple means of communication. You have to set up phone, texts, messaging apps. It's going to take some real work. Second, you have to develop superb contact lists, people that are regularly updated, people who know what they're doing. And I've put there things like government offices and local agronomists, but don't forget traders, big traders, those who constantly move goods in and out of regions. I'd like to mention here that it's much better if we do this country by country or even globally. We should be setting up information networks that all people can use and update, working together. Okay, remote assessment, what's critical? What are we going to assess? And you see that we're building this on the seed security framework. Well, first of all, for availability, you have to look at farmer and local market seed supplies. Formal sector seed supplies may be community-based, but community-based are generally minimal to the overall supply. Now, I'm signaling far and local market supplies because very often when we do assessments, we just look at the formal sector. We need to go beyond that. In terms of access, yes, prices will go up, and you have to say to what degree. But remember that if farmers are saving seed, the total amounts to be bought might be less than normal. So prices going up doesn't necessarily mean more money spent. And then, of course, access to markets and access to social networks. Now, quality, this is very interesting. For the informal supplies, so for the farmer seed, we don't expect a change in quality. This is good news. For formal supplies, we have to look at it. There might be issues with certification, but the big issue, and we are going to discuss this, particularly Dr. McGuire, but the big issue here on the formal supplies might be, do we have the right crops and varieties? You know, finally, there are, in doing assessment, you know, remember that there are seed-specific signals. You know, so beyond markets not functioning, beyond going down to purchasing power, there are key seed signals which you really need to focus on beforehand. So are crop profiles being changed? Are the areas being planted greatly reduced? So for remote assessment, I think we have the building blocks in place to do it, and some of us are already starting. I think we need to share experiences. Moving forward to implementation, if there is a problem, generally us in the room, we're doing 4 types of implementation. There's direct seed distribution, DSD. There's seed vouchers and fairs, SVF. Some of us are doing very interesting cash assistance, and then market-led support. So these are the 4 major types we know, and please during the discussion add if you're doing some other things. Important is that across any type of implementation, during COVID, we see 6 basic principles. First, invest in two-way information systems. We've discussed this. Second, put crops on offer which are priority for the upcoming season. And we say priority in terms of food security, nutrition, and resilience. Some of you are working on market-oriented crops, specific value chains, crops mainly for income. You might review if this is the right crop choice during the COVID period. Finally, no matter what, farmers should be given options. Give them a choice of crop when possible. Continuing on the principles, you all know this, crops and varieties put on offer have to be proven, adapted, meet farmers' preferences. It's really better to have no seed intervention than to promote unadapted or undesired seed. Fourth, and this may be controversial to some of you, do not provide new varieties during this period. Full stop. New introductions always have to be accompanied by extension services. And at this point, frankly, you know, extension agents aren't going very much into the field. Storage information has to be promoted. You know, we often think about this as a lesser activity, but during COVID-19, this is going to be the strategic task. How do we scale this up and quickly? And I hope that Dieudonné Baribuzzo will give us some really practical insights here. So much faster, much bigger scale than we've ever done before. And finally, as a principle, let's coordinate. Let's really coordinate and work together. The food security cluster, whatever coordinating body you work with, it has to be informed. We want to share information, methods of assessment, intervention approaches. Okay, so this is what you already knew, but we're just reminding you. This is the last section. Let's get to specific implementation response. Many of you raised this as the issue you wanted to discuss. And I don't know if I mentioned that 600 of you registered here. So you have lots of different interests, but specific implementation came up again and again. Okay, I mean, there are general constraints to be verified. We know that travel to local markets may be disrupted. We know that supply chains may be shortened, that buying power of farmers may go down. But in all of this we do, let's find the evidence. Not just yes or no, but what's the degree of the stress? Okay, now for some specifics. So direct seed distribution. You all know this. You procure seed and then you basically give it free. This is the predominant response of most of you. What do we see as the specific challenges? Might be procurement. You know, it depends where in the quantity, and Sean McGuire is going to discuss this. Getting the right varieties, again, it's not just the amounts, but do you have the right crops and varieties? Quality screening. We often have a quite rigorous formal screening. Maybe we're going to have to look for some flexibility in screening, even including informal, expert, local-based screening processes. Do we have the flexibility? Continuing with DSD timelines, DSD often seed arrives late, even without COVID. We think that COVID-19 might even double the timeline. And we're very curious if anyone online has actually mapped out the timelines for DSD under COVID. We think they're going to extend greatly. So I hope that comes up during discussion. Have you mapped out how much time it really will take? And then finally, even with DSD, you're going to need to program remote follow-up and feedback, very sophisticated programming like we've never had before, because to be honest, most of us won't be in the field. So how do you get ongoing remote feedback that is technically rigorous? Okay, seed vouchers and fairs. This is the second most preferred option by many of you. Just to remind you what a fair looks like, there are many, many people coming together at one time. For fairs, what do we think are the pivotal elements? Well, bringing people together physically. And it's not just the beneficiaries. And there might be like 400, 500 beneficiaries. It's also bringing together the traders and the sellers. So you're bringing together in a fair your seed supply for a region. Up front, we believe that fairs have potential to do harm, and the potential is high. So you really have to measure risk versus benefit. There are mitigating measures. Staggering days, is that enough? Let's think hard on that one. And then again, to remind you that fairs versus, let's say, DSD take a lot of work and over a lengthy period. Identifying suppliers, registering beneficiaries, you know, setting up a fair space. It's a lot of work. Okay, cash assistance linked to seed. And the CVA is for cash and voucher assistance. There's some excellent guides and extensive programming on cash assistance in other sectors, non-seed. We can build on this. But the first point is that in seed-related assistance, there's relatively little experience directly linking cash use to seed. And there's a really, really interesting recent review that was done by a project called S34D. I've highlighted it there. It's just come out, but they also, they document what's there, but they also say there's relatively little experience. For cash and seed, it has to be easily available, limited scouting time. It will require, if you do this, that farmers have to be sensitized to use cash for seed if that's their priority. And then again, you need remote follow-up and feedback. We would suggest don't do cash assistance with seed if you haven't done it before. If you do decide to do it this season, we'd all love to hear your experiences. It's a bit experimental, but can be very effective. Finally, market led support as a fourth option. And you can support formal seed markets, informal seed markets, both. To date, again, there's been relatively little experience in seed response and market-led support. That said, we want to show you what has been done and what can be done, and we're going to focus on the informal sector support, mainly because it's so little talked about. So for instance, for availability, you can give advances to traders to seek out supplies, and particularly of crops that aren't in so much the formal sector. You know, so things like barley or chickpea, traders will know where to find them. You might give under access transport vouchers to traders to move supply to remote areas. This has been tested. On quality, you know, many of us have worked with traders. Now, I'm talking about non-certified seed, just to be clear. So we work with traders to improve seed storage. We work with traders to distinguish among varieties. Working with traders, working with the informal sector, has the possibility to improve seed quality and access at scale. Again, we have limited experience, but the impact could be high. Finally, where are we? We have 4 types of implementation. Modalities, maybe you have others. None is perfect, none is a winner. You have to think about your context. In addition, just to remind you that COVID effects will last many seasons. So for instance, if it lasts 2 years, depending on the farming system, it will last 2, 4, or 6 seasons. So 6 seasons will be in a farming system, which has 3 seasons a year. If COVID lingers 3 years, we're talking about responses, perhaps referring to 9 seasons. Whatever we do, we have to make sure that we take the long term in consideration right now from the beginning, that we don't become repetitive. So the 2 big things we have to do immediately, probably this season, is to tailor and change DSD, SVF cash to the new reality. I imagine some of us will do this right now. Some of us will modify it after the first season, and we learn a great deal. But the real growth area, particularly if COVID is going to last 6 or 9 seasons, is that we have to move to approaches that are system supporting, not stopgap. We have to move to market-led approaches. Oops. And in this vein, what we're proposing right now, which has already started actually, is a COVID-19 and seed security working group. One to look at the now, the stopgap, because what we're doing now is stopgap, but the other to look at the next 5 years. So stop thinking short term, let's look at the next 5 years. You know, COVID is presenting new challenges over existing ones, like drought or locusts or floods or poor soil fertility. But in many ways, it's going to push us to think in exciting ways, because COVID is making us think about fluctuating environments, dangerous environments, hard to implement in environments. So what I'm hoping and others are hoping is that figuring out how to operate in COVID-19 will lead us to much more creative, much more effective seed system support, not just during COVID, but in conflict, fragile state areas and onwards. So we have constraints, but this could be a very exciting, creative, learning, improving practice time, very accelerated, improving practice time. Finally, there are lots of resources. We've just listed some here. There are resources on assessment, direct seed distribution, cash transfers, storage. And you who signed up for the webinar, you also listed resources in your chat boxes. So we're going to put these all together for you within the next few days. And you'll see you have lots of information, practical advice, strategic advice on which to build. Oops, okay. So moving forward, we're going to take questions on all of us when we produce some ideas and have you react to all. Moving forward is Dieudonné online.
Yes, I'm here, Louise.
Hi, good.
Hi.
So I'd like to move forward to Dr. Baribotso Dieudonné and have him take over. How do you want me, should I put everything out at once? How do you want me to do this?
Yeah, you can, yeah. So that's fine for now.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So thank you all for attending this workshop or webinar. So I'm just going to give a short summary of some of the activities we need to think about as we getting into COVID, especially as it relates to smallholder farmers and seed. And I wanted to share this short study. This is really limited. We just went into 4 regions in Tanzania. Basically, this was based on some of the ICT effort we have been doing here at Purdue to try to scale up the use of hermetic bags at the smallholder farms. So as we were implementing these studies remotely, basically people were sitting somewhere, in offices in Tanzania and then just calling farmers from all over Tanzania. We had a sample of about 1,000 farmers. So when we were trying to follow up, how did farmers use different technology, basically their cell phones, just regular phones without internet, to be able to access information where the vendors are located. And so they could be able to access or buy hermetic bags, especially pigs. So we had a sample of 788 farmers. And you can see when we basically, in the part of the survey, when COVID was happening, we decided to include 4 questions. And here I'm just going to share one of the 4 questions that we asked those farmers. As you can see, you have somewhere around 98% or 95% that were aware about COVID. You always have folks who are not aware. I think they don't keep track of news or something is happening. And then when basically we asked them, so this was a number of farmers, a number of agro dealers who are selling these hermetic bags and so on. And then when we asked them about these questions, you can see where you have 36%, basically most farmers are complaining about selling their crops. So these questions were asked in areas where crops have been harvested around Mwanza. We had Mwanza, we had Shinyanga, and a few other places. So you can see most farmers were really concerned about selling their crops. And then the next issue was mostly their concern was about lack of production resources. So when they were thinking about if we need to plant the next season, where do we get our seed, our fertilizer, even bags for storage and so on. So and then you have the agro dealers who were really worried about, sourcing and selling their product. So as we look at this COVID situation, I think it's going to be different from one country to another. Especially some countries have total lockdown, and I think Tanzania has not yet had a lockdown. So basically people are still moving in many places. And again, even within region. So some places you have lockdowns in major cities, and then the rural areas still functioning. So that means if you have your offices in main town like Nairobi, and then the rest of the country is not locked down, then it's really going to be a challenge. You need to think about a different way of reaching those farmers with, either seed or either technologies to preserve whatever they have produced. So, so thinking about storage is really critical, as you saw in Louis' presentation, which was really excellent data. About 35%, of farmers basically rely on their own stocks to be able to, to plant the next season. So we really need to think about how do we help them to preserve the quality of that seed so they are able to plant good quality seed the next season. And again, as we think about this COVID, we really need to think about designing new approaches to be able to reach farmers. So, and in some of these cases, for example, what we have done in Sierra Leone, during the Ebola crisis, we really used quite a bit of radio talk shows. Basically, it's a two-way communication, just trying to help farmers to understand how they can address their issues of, for example, seed, if they have plastic jerry cans, if they have metal drums, if they can get any hermetic containers, they should be able to preserve their seed. And in some situations, for example, during this COVID, you'll find that farmers are harvesting in some regions, and other regions farmers are planting. So that means the interventions will be different from one region or from one country to another. So we really need to be country-specific or region-specific when we think about these interventions. So in some of the other tools we have used, for example, for ICT, has been also the production of cell phone videos. So this basically, it's like a 1 or 2 minute video that show farmers how they can store or protect their seed during storage. And these videos are shared via Bluetooth, so you don't really need any internet connection. So, and now I think with WhatsApp, for example, we should be able to circulate most of the information to folks in the rural areas. So I think I will probably stop there, Louise, just to leave time for other people to present and then have more time for questions.
Great. So just to emphasize that the work in Sierra Leone on storage, helping people store and how to store, was done totally remotely, thanks to the creativity of many people. Okay, moving on to the second theme, and then there'll be questions. The second theme is, let me introduce Dr. Sean McGuire, and he can introduce what he's going to basically focus on. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Louise. I just wanted to raise one point here, really, because I was asked to talk about seed procurement and quality assurance and give some insights into some of the challenges we're facing now. And I know I've seen names pop up among the audience, and I recognize a lot of the names, so it's very exciting. Many of you know all about seed quality assurance and what it involves, but just very briefly, this snapshot here is just a couple of examples of reporting forms that are part of FAO's seed procurement, and I'm sure a lot of other organizations, seed procurement for emergencies. And so we have inspectors who are, seed is moving in large amounts in direct distribution from one place to another. We have inspectors at both the supplier's premises and at unloading, and those sometimes are in different countries. They have to take samples, take notes of seed lots, and the sorts of reports you see there, which run to 20 or 30 pages, sometimes 50 pages each for each supplier, as well as sending that to laboratories in the country of sampling, as well as an international laboratory. All of this, of course, is just to make sure that what farmers receive is good quality, is alive, and performs to the standards we want, because these are vulnerable farmers and we owe it to them to give them good quality materials. This is all just part of accountability to affected populations. Now, in a case like this photo is from last week in South Sudan. We're procuring 10,000 tons of seed. So that's several hundred 18-wheeler trucks of seed from about 5 different countries, 20 different suppliers. So it is a lot of work, and this is just in normal time. And my point is that under COVID-19, we're seeing restrictions on almost all of these operations. So cargo flights, for example, from South Sudan, are not operating. So we can't send samples to international laboratories for testing. Border inspections are slowing down, as are getting inspecting agents out to do the observations, just simply because of movement restrictions. Laboratories are not working or working on very restricted hours. So all of this just makes things more complicated. Now for us, that's fine. We've got a lot of staff, a lot of technical staff. We've been planning procurements in big countries like South Sudan for 8 months. And, we're setting up flexible protocols, adjusting contracts with suppliers and trying to deal with that. But my point really is that for other agencies procuring seed, will there be capacity to deal with additional delays of time? Will you be able to, those who are thinking of direct distribution, how to adjust and respond to how you do that. If you're already up against time limits for the season in a normal situation, is this really the season to start doing direct distribution with added delays due to COVID-19? So it's really just, I put this up as a sort of a frightening moment, as a reality check to say, you know, seed procurement is complicated with justification, and it's time consuming, and it will be more time consuming. So we need to be aware of that. One final point is just for, you know, what does this mean for seed production, not just for emergencies, but for formal sector in coming seasons? You know, next, COVID-19 may not affect agricultural production directly so much, so seeds may well get produced, but the logistics in a formal seed sector, a formal seed value chain, the logistics of contract payment, inspection, processing, all of that may be affected. So we may have low, you know, decreased supplies of key crop seeds in coming seasons, or decreased quality. And so, you know, this is an important policy point to underline for, you know, those where we can talk about, you know, give messages to governments that maybe movement of seed inspectors, seed quality control functions could be considered essential services, and, you know, allowed to continue despite restrictions that are imposed in different countries. That's all I'm going to say on this for now. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you, Sean. There will be questions on this, I'm sure. Okay, Julie. Julie Martin is now going to give some insight into the broader picture.
Good morning, everyone. I'm wishing I had a picture for you all to look at, so you're not my face is not the only thing you're looking at. So thanks for the chance to come in. It's nice to see so many familiar names and good questions in the chat box. I wanted to sort of put a framing around the issues that we're seeing. We know that smallholder farmers may be among the first to really feel the potential market, input supply, and food security impacts resulted from COVID-19. And the current context has required many assistance programs, from emergency response to development, to really have to pivot to reflect our new reality. But not only do we as organizations need to figure out how to pivot, we need to recognize that the farmers that we work with will also be looking at real-time ways to pivot their production as a result of cash, labor, and market constraints. So the real question is, how do we support immediate needs and long-term seed system health at the same time? Excuse me. As humanitarians, I think, as humanitarians, there has to be a constant weighing of whether business as usual and our preferred methods has the potential to do more harm than good. You know, I think Louise mentioned the seed fair, and I saw some active discussion around whether that was wise during this current context. I think that's a question we all have to look at very carefully. You know, does the long-term potential to have a negative impact on the seed system outweigh a negative health consequence? And that's going to be a very context-specific discussion and debate for each item. I think what I've seen is that there's also a prioritization occurring globally. So looking at how agriculture and seed activities fit within the whole list of critical actions that we need to support vulnerable populations in need during this time. So I think we as seed and food security practitioners have to think about how we can best sequence and link response in our sectors with other critical sectors. So how do we support farmers who now deal with their normal stresses of planting and production, and add on the layer of uncertain supply and market chains and household health and food security at the same time? There's tremendous pressure on implementing partners to serve vulnerable populations. And I think it's a good time for us as a community to return to evidence-based best practices to make sure that we're making the most out of limited resources, right? So there's staff capacity, travel ability, limited resources for response. And we really need to think about how the impact of our short-term COVID-related responses are going to affect long-term seed system strengthening activities that are undergoing and normally happening. I think it's really time for us to get creative in terms of interventions and assessments. Pre-COVID, there are many work streams looking at how to maximize farmers' ability to choose the seed that they want, when they want it, in desired quality and quantity, in a range of contexts, from normal times to stress situations like drought, conflict, and locusts. And I think that lessons from many of these work streams and activities, ranging from saving better seed to selling in small packs to experimenting with really novel last mile delivery models, can support smallholders during the COVID outbreak. So how do we accelerate, take lessons learned, and really expand these models? I think now more than ever, a collaborative approach is important. This might include remote analysis and information sharing, sharing of market information, seed channel analysis, coordination with other actors through central bodies like the Food Security Cluster, and looking for new, potentially remote ways to fill critical information gaps to inform successful response. This is a tremendous task, but one that I really feel hopeful that we can approach with best practices and a real understanding of how seed systems respond to stress. I think that's it for me. We have a number of really good questions, so I'm going to turn it over. My kids are also making noise, so I can put myself back on mute.
Andrea, you're going to take over, yeah? Great.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was super interesting. And I can see you've all been keeping us busy on the question front. It's tricky to keep up with what's going on in there, to be honest. So I think for all of you as presenters, if you see any questions in there that particularly resonate with you, please feel free to just jump on those. A couple of reflections. I saw there was some questions around mobile money for conditional cash transfers for seed and whether there was any experience in that, and somebody had commented on that in the chat box. So I would encourage you, if you do have any resources or learning or anything around any of that, to share those, or share some links, or share them with us after, and we can circulate that information. One that was, they just mentioned that the Thinking Working Group on Seed Security is a brilliant idea. Given that employing emergent strategies and being quick to adapt and adopt is likely to provide faster lessons. In addition, sharing experiences between countries on key things that might provide a softer landing out of the pandemic situation. So that basically having a chance to discuss as a group would be really, really important. I did notice that we had a couple of questions around how can we make sure that farmers don't consume their seed. And Sean, I think you'd put a note in there that farmers really tend to do this as a last resort. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
And not too much on that. I mean, it is, I guess the question is, you know, what would change now from other, as Louise said at the start, farmers in many places are dealing with multiple stresses as a matter of course. So, you know, the seed is a key input. It's pretty uncommon for people to consume that unless there's other circumstances or they're quite confident they can get it on the market.
Great, thanks, Sean. One question, which was, you know, we kind of compare a lot about the Ebola situation and the COVID response. There was one question around evidence from Ebola suggested that recovery happened fairly quickly in the following season, with limited medium or long-term impacts on ag production. But I think we're assuming that there will be a longer-term impact from the COVID-19. So I don't know, perhaps Louise or anyone, if you wanted to comment on that from your experience from Ebola.
Right, so there are probably also people online. There's so many experts who worked during this period. Ebola in Sierra Leone, I can't remember, it was about two seasons, 1 season, 2 season.
Yeah.
We really don't know with COVID. And I think part of the COVID scenario will be an intense one, like the lockdown now, and part of it will be lingering effects. So maybe we'll never go back to freely open markets with thousands of people. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. But that's the kind of thinking we have to do, is how do we modify what we do routinely? What should we stop altogether, and what should we promote? But my sense, but others add, is that COVID might be considerably more lingering than Ebola, and it's certainly more widespread. I mean, that's the big difference, that we really should be talking about country by country collaboration across countries, across continents. Ebola was much more localized.
Thanks, Louise. And we had a number of questions from the registration phase of when people registered for the event as well. And one of those, Julie, specifically for you, I think, was, could you give us some examples of resilience of farming systems to other shocks? What experience do we have, and what are some of the lessons learned that we can apply to this context, perhaps?
Sure, good question. I think it's really critical to, and it's been touched on before, but to identify that stress in seed systems and for smallholder farmers is not something entirely new. What we're seeing, of course, is a bit different, probably most similar to Ebola, just in terms of disruption and household labor and health issues. But I think many of the lessons learned over time still hold true. I think we meet needs in the short term, but have an eye to the long-term functionality of seed systems, making sure that we are not undermining existing seed channels, farmer preference, traditional methods of getting the kinds of seeds that farmers want when they want it. I think, a lot of the data that exists from Louise and others shows that farmers are resourceful and get the seed that they need and are very informed. So there is, in many ways, a built-in resilience, if you will. Sometimes we need to look at non-traditional actors, right? So, it's funny, we say seed systems and sometimes we think formal sector agro-dealers, but really when you look at the small traders, they're the ones getting through when the roads are down. You look at the people who continue to make the systems function, and I think that's where you find some of the keys to resilience. And also there's quite a bit of data about the impacts of some really significant disasters on seed systems, and the ability for people to continue to get what they need. So just framing that. Louise, did you want to add?
Yeah, just to add, we have to be careful about assuming disaster and total system breakdown. In Haiti, everyone with the earthquake, it was assumed that nothing worked. Indeed, the seed that was planted just after the earthquake, only 4% came from aid. Despite all of our aid, other channels did work. Another example, the genocide in Rwanda, the civil war, there were 30 countries distributing seed. What farmers actually planted, 90% came from local channels. So let's not assume the worst, and let's look for opportunities to strengthen what is working.
Thank you both. We just have a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to note that we will be addressing some of these questions in written form, and we'll be sending those out to you with links to the recording. So just to note that we won't get through all the questions obviously today. There were quite a few questions around distance, connections, measurement, as well as assessments. And I wondered, Louise, how can we incorporate a layer of the COVID-19 into SSSA tool?
Okay, so the Seed System Security Assessment tool has been used in many contexts, just earthquake, flood, Ebola, war. The content would not change dramatically, except we'd probably look much more intensely at these social networks, if they are important. So we already look at agri-dealers, we already look at trader seed supply, which, by the way, I think is the most important thing you have to assess if you're going to look at availability. You know, get a list of all the big traders, those who move 400 metric tons a season, and talk to them. The big change with adding a layer linked to COVID is that we're working remotely now. So the change in the tool won't be the content, it's how to do this remotely. And just so you know, some of us are already starting to work remotely or have worked remotely, for instance, in Northwest Syria, thinking about doing remote assessments in Northern Nigeria. So it's not totally new. Not easy, but not totally new.
Thanks, Louise. There are a couple more questions I'd like to get through. We are at the hour, so I mean, obviously people may need to jump off, but I think if you're all good, we'll just continue for another 5 minutes. Great. All right. So, Sean, we had one for you. I think, there was a lot of discussion around the formal sector as well, but I wanted to pull up one of the questions, which was how to ensure minimal disruption to private sector models.
Thank you. We flagged that question not because it was easy to answer, but because it's very, very important. The obvious way into that first is to say where, as much as possible, to use market-based approaches to maintain the link between supplier or seller and farmer buyers, so that farmer buyers still are the ones making the choices. Those relationships with the sellers are maintained, and farmers are, both parties are learning about what varieties, what other characteristics are important. When, we go into direct distribution, that can, undermine the markets in lots of ways. Another point to say is that even if it is direct distribution, how long does it last? What is the exit strategy from emergency response? Julie was talking about that, into more resilient, how do we pivot toward more development approaches, bringing resilience into the picture. And I don't think there's a single way. Each place, it will be a different context. But what we do know is that if it happens again and again, we've seen this in lots of places. From the market side, you end up with one or two large suppliers providing what is effectively the humanitarian industry with the seed. And that's not a desirable situation to get to. So, and the final thing is to say is, what was mentioned by Louise in the presentation is about informing cluster or other coordinating bodies, that if you have tons of agencies, each one of them chasing after seed from wherever they can get for their projects in an emergency, and there's no coordination, then that's not going to help markets at all. So, at the very least, coordination of emergency actions, even better, joined up thinking over the coming seasons of how to kind of keep what market systems are being developed going. Because a lot of us are investing in seed sector development, seed enterprises, all of that stuff has been going on, and we don't want to lose that.
Thanks, Sean. I'm going to just move us on to another key area. I think that someone suggested it's high time to think about utilizing ICT tools. And I think, Judoni, this might be one for you, but disruptions of the seed supply chains within countries and across borders, coupled with restricted people movement, has led to shortages and/or late deliveries. We know a lot of that already. And even production is likely to be adversely affected in many countries. So I wonder, from your experience, are there any innovative ICT tools that could be used to mitigate such disruptions, both in the short and the long term?
Yeah, so thank you, Andrea. So I think I would go back first to what Sean said. There is really a need to think about on the policy side. How do we include some of this seed activity into the essential services? Because that would really help move seed, kind of minimize a bit that disruption. Unless it's included into essential services, then it's just going to be almost complete disruption of the supply of seed. And in terms of ICT, I have been working with some companies, in Kenya, Tanzania as well, and we know some of those are using SMS coupons, for example. So rather than field technicians to go and distribute seed, now you have farmers, using SMS coupons and then going to the hubs to collect whatever they need. So basically, you can minimize the social contact by having just a few farmers going to a place and collecting, rather than having like a fair and so on. They get a voucher, remotely on SMS, and then they go and collect. collect their seeds. So I think that's one way to do it. And we have the capacity, you know, ICT companies that can do such activities.
Thanks, Judai. And kind of related to that, can you launch a storage intervention long distance? What experience is there around that?
Yeah, so like Louise was mentioning, we did this in Sierra Leone. Basically, we did some training of trainers from here, and we had a local team of CRS, Catholic Relief Services. We had Cordaid and we had Caritas. So we did a training from here. And then those teams were also embedded into the medical team to go out in the field. And what we also used was ICT. So we did quite a bit of radio talk show. As I mentioned earlier, we had cell phone videos. Basically, those are simple cell phones that can be shared via Bluetooth. And so when you get to a village, you can just leave that with a farmer. So they have the material on their phone. And so that really helps in terms of expanding, training them, you know, minimizing quite a bit of contact, yeah.
So I have a question for you there. We know how to get information out. How did you get feedback, either from farmers or traders? Did you build that in at all?
So what we were doing there was a radio talk show. So basically you host a radio talk show. So and that's a two-way. So basically you're chatting with those farmers and they share with you the experience, how things are going in the field, you know, what kind of challenges are they having. And from there now you can think of, you know, redesigning or coming up with new messages and so on. So rather than just doing jingles, which is a one way, basically you're telling farmers, oh, use this variety of seed and so on. Basically you have a two-way. So you have a radio talk show where you talk for, let's say 15 minutes, and then you give farmers another 20 to 30 minutes for them to provide feedback and share their experiences. So that's how we had to collect feedback from those farmers. Now what we are doing, for example, we are using ICT platforms. Basically farmers can go and log in a system. Basically they get a short code. So we advertise a short code on the radio, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a farmer is able to use his cell phone and just text, you know, this is what I'm having as issues. And then from the back end of the system, we can get their feedback. So that's how we are now expanding the program. Just beyond just radio talk show, we are now using ICT. SMS is basically, farmer can send us their feedback and so on.
That's great. Thank you, Dieudonné. I think we have time maybe for just one more question right now. Sean, this one I think is for you. So there might be a shortage of seed of cereal crops due to the closure of the borders, limited transport, no field inspections, etc. How do you think that we should address this in the emergencies?
Well, some of the points I mentioned earlier, and Dieudonné repeated them about, you know, the logistical and inspection services being seen as essential services, that being able to continue as much as possible. Another point, again, on policies around exports. In some cases, seed markets are regional. I just heard this morning about bean seeds being produced in Central America, not some countries closing borders to what is a regional market. That's a problem. You know, that needs to be addressed. But for other things, then it's about, does it need to be certified seed if one is doing these activities? What ways can we do to assess and screen, as Louise was saying earlier, the quality of seed? Can it be processed and cleaned anyway from different sources, if that's allowed legally? And in some cases, countries have seed regulations that can be modified in situations of emergency, say toward quality declared seed or to standard seed, for example. But at the same time, it's, you know, usually the seed is, there will be planting material available. And, you know, this is, as was said earlier, farmers are using local markets. The availability, you know, is a normal matter of course in smallholder areas. So this is the seed many farmers use a lot anyway. It's a question of whether it's worth it as aid practitioners for us to make use of that. Are we adding value there and filling a gap, or could we intervene and support and improve practice in other ways, such as storage? So I'd say, you know, back to the question I would ask at the end of that is if there is a real supply problem for quality assured seed, maybe there are other activities an agency should be doing in that circumstance.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to stop the questions for this session now. I know we've had over 70 questions in the box, so there's a lot more to be said and asked and answered. And I think we all agree that this is, you know, the beginning of an ongoing conversation, not even the beginning, but an ongoing conversation that we need to continue in some form or another. So I don't know if any of you have any final comments you wanted to make before we close, or we are okay right now. Louise? Do you come for a cup of tea? Okay.
I was just on mute. Just seriously, just my final concern is that if we are going to do remote assessments, we need very, very good remote contacts. Whether it's traders or seed companies, they need to be local contacts to where you're working, as well as regional contacts. Contacts. And I think some organization has to really start to organize this seriously. And it would save all of us, you know, all of us time. I would nominate FAO, but Sean might get angry with me. But the food security cluster, seriously, getting remote contact lists for every country and local areas will make all of our work much, much easier.
Thanks, Louise. And I think just what the final point there is, you know, the more, sorry, Louise, I think your volume's just going there. I think the more we communicate and work together on answering some of these questions and sharing some of this information, the better. So I'd like to thank Louise Spelling, Judone Borobitsa, Sean Maguire and Julie March for your expert insights today. I took away a number of key messages that I'm not going to go into now, given our time, but some really great food for thought on some of the ways forward. And particularly wanted to note Louise's comment on a discussion group around COVID-19 and food security that looks both at issues now as well as 5 years into the future. And so I think that there will definitely be some next steps around there. We will be reaching out to everyone who registered and posting the link to the recording, as well as some additional written answers to the questions that you posted. Sorry we weren't able to get through all of those today. And just a note that we also have a scale crowdsourcing document that has information, a seeds section in that, as well as a number of other sections. If you would like to share some resources and information there, I think Kristen can share that link in the chat box now. And so with that, I'd like to thank the rest of the team and Charlie Davis for your support too. And I look forward to future engagement with you all, and keep safe.